Thank you. Not surprisingly, my perspective is heavily driven by employment, and employment is only lightly discussed often at these gatherings as we talk about percents of GDP and so on, and I just want to make a handful of points as we go about dealing with the deficit and deficit reduction, the criticality of a much sharper and more intense focus on employment. Let me start by noting that Kelly Services does about 70% of its business with just 100 companies. They're global companies. I'm very much involved with the decision of these companies as to where they're going to create employment. And the deficit and political stability very, very critical to those discussions. But let me make three very sharp points. If the unemployment rate is not reduced in this country, a continued political will towards deficit reduction will not occur. If we have historically high unemployment in this country, political instability will continue to oscillate higher and higher, and there will not be the sustained type of political will that's going to be necessary to provide the structural solutions. And so if employment doesn't have a bigger seat at the table as we talk about the various reductions in programs, changes in tax rates and so on, we're not going to achieve ultimate success. Secondly, it's not a question of investment bringing employment. It's also just the question of that. It's also a question of how do employment dynamics bring investment, because most of the companies that I work with have a choice as to where are they going to create jobs. And as we look at how we choose to tax employment in this country, both directly and then indirectly with health care, we need to abandon a myth, which is that other countries have higher social costs attached to employment. As I look at total costs of employment on a global basis, we need to accept, and primarily driven by health care, that the cost of employment in the United States is non-competitive with most other industrialized countries and increasingly at parity with many of the emerging industrializing countries. If we don't solve the health care issue, if we allow it in particular to continue to drive up the cost of employment, it will be a rational decision of policymakers and companies to choose to create jobs elsewhere. In particular, we should note that the unemployment rate for college-educated workers in the U.S. never drifted much above 5 and is steadily coming down. One of the reasons that it is easier to employ people with college degrees in this country is that the types of employment taxes and social costs that we place on employment fall disproportionately upon lower wage workers. Health care cost is the same, whether you are the CEO of a company or the person making $10 an hour in the company. And so if you look at the social cost burden in the United States on low-wage workers, it is completely non-competitive with other countries. There is a reason we are not creating jobs in this country for those without a college degree, and in particular, one of the reasons is that it's not worth the cost of investment to many companies. Thirdly, we have allowed the education system, an issue I know dear to the CED, we've allowed the education system to not provide either the quantity or the types of workers that we need. Not only do machinist jobs go unfilled, I can tell you as a company charged with filling science, engineering jobs in particular, we can't fill those either. The unemployment rate for some of the specialties and engineering degrees is under 2.5%. It will take a long time to redirect the education system. It would take much less time, while we do redirect the education system, to alter our immigration policies so that engineers and scientists in particular can come into this country. Because if they don't, my clients are simply choosing to move those jobs outside of the country. Employment begets employment, employment begets taxes, and ultimately, employment has to stay in focus as we look at deficit reduction, because we will not achieve either sustained political will, nor will we achieve the types of tax revenues that we need if we do not create an economy that makes it competitive to put employment in the United States rather than in other countries in the world.